Previously, TwirlySocrates tried to argue that he knew evolution was a thing because successful traits become more and more common, even ubiquitous within a population, meaning those traits become the norm throughout the population. So, I described the breadpan principle to him, which acknowledges how the opposite is true. It states a dented breadpan makes dented loaves, and that the human genome is like this. Contrary to what the evolutionists claim, the human genome is not getting better and better over time. The breadpan is just getting more dinged up, battered, and worn out. The human genome is getting worse and worse. I told TwirlySocrates how cancer, old age, and the massive rise of genetically inherited diabetes are all evidence of this. Our conversation ended when he stopped answering my questions, but since then, he's come back and started answering questions again. Do you agree that the genetic disorder of diabetes is becoming more and more common, not less and less common?
Yes, but this doesn't counter my point. Both type 1 and type 2 diabetes likely involve people with genetic predispositions where disease is triggered by an environmental factor, a virus, diet, undertrained immune systems, etc. So yes, it's more common, likely because modern living has exposed us to more environmental triggers. Because it's a modern phenomenon, natural selection has been unable to effectively operate on genes tied to diabetes. Furthermore, modern medical treatment of diabetes interferes with natural selection by allowing those afflicted by diabetes to have children.
Your opening argument was that successful traits become more and more common. Therefore, examples of negative traits becoming more and more common should counter that argument and substantiate the breadpan principle.
The genes that cause diabetes have always been in the population. They just haven't been problematic until today, because our lifestyle is completely different.
Whether they have always been in the population or not is irrelevant. Your premise states those genes should be becoming less and less common, not more and more common. Now let's go back and talk about things on the cellular level. Do you agree that a cancer cell is a degenerate cell? TwirlySocrates has chosen not to answer. How about I rephrase the question? Do you agree that cancer is a problem because of the successful reproduction of bad genes in a single body?
I disagree. A predisposition to cancer isn't a burden to an organism who is never exposed to an agent that gives them cancer. Hunter-gatherers never were exposed to cigarettes or asbestos or whatever.
How does your statement relate to what we're talking about? I'm talking about within a single body, not about being predisposed. Just isolate that person. A cancerous cell forms, then reproduces, and then those cells continue to reproduce. And those bad genes are continually being spread throughout the body. Those cells aren't just dying off. According to your opening principle, bad cells should just die off, and we should be left with nothing but the best of cells, and our cells should just be getting better and better. The cells within our bodies reproduce way faster than we produce offspring. Just looking at the human body as a biome, cells become degenerate over time. They don't become better and better.
What? No, that doesn't happen within an organism. That happens within populations of organisms.
Do you agree that the human body is a biome? TwirlySocrates has chosen not to answer. It's the same concept. Why would it happen within the human population, but not within the cells of the human body?
Cells that divide in your body are not yet differentiated into tissues. There's no test for a cell's fitness before it reproduces. Natural selection would not apply because the fitness of the cell doesn't impact the cell's reproduction. Red blood cells do not reproduce. White blood cells, under normal immunological circumstances, do not reproduce. Therefore, they are not subject to natural selection.
Do you claim that natural selection doesn't apply to microbiology?
No.
Do you agree that dead cells can't replicate, and that there is a breaking point before death where a cell loses the ability to reproduce?
Yes.
Not all bees can reproduce. Do you agree that bees are still subject to natural selection? Again, TwirlySocrates has chosen not to answer.
A worker bee isn't really an organism. The queen is.
Do you disagree with these definitions of the word organism? TwirlySocrates has chosen not to answer whether he agrees or not.
Use the first definition. Reproduction is a vital process, and workers can't do it.
Therefore, according to you, all infertile human beings are not organisms. Seeing how you're going that far, I think we're just going to have to call an impasse on that.
Okay, let me rephrase my opening question. Do you agree that, in the absence of human interference, over long periods of time, beneficial traits will become more common, or even ubiquitous within a population? Do you agree deleterious traits become suppressed, even eliminated, for the same reasons?
No. The breadpan principle does not just affect humans. It affects animals as well, such as koalas.
If almost exclusively eating a toxic leaf wasn't enough, koalas are quite particular about which of those leaves they'll eat. Australia has hundreds of species of eucalyptus tree, but when it comes to choosing food and refuge, koalas are actually very, very picky about what trees and what species they're going to use. A lot of that different flavor depends on what kind of soil it's growing on. A richer soil will taste better to them. They tend to dislike eucalyptus trees that are growing in poor soil. Koalas are so adapted to the specific strain of eucalyptus they like that often, once they've eaten all the leaves that they like in their range, they'll simply give up and starve to death, unable to digest a new type of leaf.
What kinds of food an animal eats and is able to digest is hereditary. It's not just a learned trait. If koalas were gaining abilities to eat new foods, you could argue that koalas are evolving. When koalas lose essential abilities that they once had, I get to argue that their genome is degrading. Do you agree that the popularity of bad genetic traits in koalas is detrimental to the koala species as a whole, downgrading the koala rather than upgrading it?
Koalas were doing perfectly fine until their environment underwent rapid change.
Losing essential abilities you once had does not qualify as fine.
Those essential abilities were lost a very long time ago when they were no longer essential. Am I right to assume your household doesn't employ a team of firefighters? Why not? Firefighters are very important for survival. Are you guys fine?
That's not a good comparison unless you're claiming every household once had its own team of firefighters.
That doesn't matter. The point is the cost-benefit analysis. Imagine 100 duplicates of Kyle Adams and his family. All of the families live where fire services are available. Next, 50 of those households decide to pay for a private fire brigade because fires are bad. Which households will fare better?
That's irrelevant to the breadpan principle. Do you agree with these definitions of the word degenerate?
I agree with the fourth definition in the context of evolution.
Under the context of evolution, it reads, of a species or any of its traits or structures, to revert to a simple, less highly organized, or less functionally active type, as a parasitic plant that has lost its taproot, or the vestigial wings of a flightless bird. Thereby you now agree that vestigial body parts qualify as a result of degeneration?
The size, strength, and function of a structure degrades, yes. Loss of the structure optimizes the organism for a specialized lifestyle.
Do you acknowledge degradation, or the corruption of the genome in degeneracy? If a virus were to suddenly chop off the part of the genome that gives us a right hand, you give me the impression that you would say, "Oh, that's just the body's way of optimizing itself. We don't really need a right hand to live. Our bodies are better off without right hands." Would you acknowledge that a missing right hand would be a degradation of the human genome?
If a virus makes any edit to a gene, the organism with that gene would either 1. Have an advantage, 2. Have a disadvantage, 3. Neither. It's a neutral change. As a result, 1. If the organism had an advantage, the genes would spread by natural selection. 2. If it didn't have an advantage, the genes would be suppressed and eventually be lost. 3. If the mutation was neutral for some reason, then it would be a roll of the dice to decide whether or not the genes would spread through the gene pool. So no, I don't agree. A degeneration is only a corruption in case 2. When that happens, natural selection removes or suppresses that variant allele. This means the gene pool does not corrupt over time. I also disagree that the gene pool overall degenerates over time. Some mutations add function.
You don't agree that a virus chopping off the DNA that gives you a right hand would count as a degradation of the human genome? Also, I notice you clearly don't appear to believe in any kind of pseudogenes or retroviruses.
Another type of structure found in the genome is called a pseudogene. It is basically a gene that in some time in the past had errors occur in its regulatory sequence and quit functioning.
And those errors that cause a gene to lose function get passed down from generation to generation.
Retroviruses like HTLV1, which cause a type of leukemia, and AIDS, make a DNA copy of their own viral genome and insert it into the host genome. If this happens inside the sperm cells or the egg cells, the retroviral DNA will be inherited by the descendants of the host. And these copies of the virus DNA are called endogenous retroviruses. In human DNA, there are about 30,000 endogenous retroviruses.
If DNA gets cut, altered, or damaged away from its original coding, those were referred to as errors, and I consider those corruptions. I'll let you chew on that. And while you're chewing on that, please consider this Stanford University article that claims our ancestors had straighter teeth than we do. Today, an estimated 50 to 70% of US children will wear braces before adulthood. As it turns out, our ancestors did not suffer from crooked teeth to the same extent that we do today. Yeah, you can say our diets are different, but if it was purely a dietary thing, if all my children eat the same foods, they have the same diet, either they would all need braces or none of them would need braces. You wouldn't just get one who needs braces. Surely there's some genetics involved here. If there is a hereditary genetic factor involved in all this, then surely it substantiates the breadpan principle. Until next time, this message has been brought to you by the Flat Earth Institute of Science, with a shout out to our Flat Earth friends at jdecals.com.
Any questions?
Darwin denies God as an agent, but then gives Mother Nature all of the qualities of God. You will see Mother Nature choosing, selecting, deciding, having wisdom, etc. It is simply a bait and switch.
The human eye needs about 40 subsystems, all working together and in harmony with each other. Logically, they all had to appear instantly together, or we would all be blind.